Hello guys, and welcome to this webinar to discuss published studies. Alright? So first of all, what is the purpose of the published articles? So why there is an article? You guys need to remember that, and I will be very quick here because this is just a review. The articles will always start with an introduction, right? So the introduction of the article is basically telling the reader why this article is important. Okay, so the introduction is the justification that the author had to create this research project, right? And then that's why the introduction is important. So they are finding things in the literature that compelled them or that directed them to study a related topic, and that's the article that you guys are reading, right? So that's the purpose of an introduction. The material and methods of the article will be how they did it, right? So that's the methods that they used, and of course the last part of the material and methods will be the statistical analysis, which is the one that we are going to discuss today about those published articles, okay? And then we have the results. So of course they want to show the readers what they found and why this is important to science, okay? And that's why they also need a section to talk about the discussion. So what is the discussion of an article? The discussion, which is basically one of the most important parts of the article, is when they compare their own findings with the findings of similar articles in the literature, all right? And then we have the conclusion, which is basically the take-home message that can be concluded from all the findings that they had. Okay, so let's start with this first article. So the title, I'm going to talk about 3 articles that we published before, and this is the first one, entitled Effect of Photodynamic Therapy with Malachite Green on Non-Surgical Periodontal Treatment in HIV Patients, right? So that's a pilot split mouth study, okay? Very well, so we know that this split mouth study, so we already expect our statistical tests to be for dependent samples, right? We are comparing what here? We are comparing the photodynamic therapy, so that's the use of laser, right? With something else, which is the malachite green, so that's a substance that they use with the laser, okay, to improve the effects of the laser, right? So I'm not going into details about this, that's just for you guys to understand a little bit of the purpose of this study, right? So we have here, of course, the material and methods, and then we have the statistical analysis here, right? So let's see what they did here. They are saying in the statistical analysis that they calculated relative risk, and that's also an association analysis, just like the chi-square, so between qualitative variables, okay? But this one was not covered in the webinar of before, because that's for postgraduate level, okay? So they are doing relative risk. We already know that cross tabs will be, showing up in our study, and then they are comparing 2 groups for non-continuous variables, right? Since this is a split mouth design, they didn't have to adjust for other factors because, for example, if the patient has diabetes, for example, they are comparing one side of this patient with the other side of the same patient, so diabetes is actually affecting the results of both groups. So that's why they are saying that they are not adjusting the results. All right? So then we have here the use of Friedman tests, right? So they are using Friedman tests to assess those differences. So let's see what they got here. Those are the results. So they are just describing the results, central tendencies, so the age, the frequencies of genders as well, because it's a qualitative variable. And then they have this first table. So I'm talking about table 1 of this article, which is a cross tabs, right? It's a cross table. So we have here many variables being compared with treatment type, and that's the main comparison of the study, okay? So SRP would stands for scaling and route planning, and SRP plus PDT is, of course, the scaling and route planning with the use of laser, so photodynamic therapy, right? So that would be the test group. And they are not calculating chi-square, but they could calculate chi-square as well. And you guys have also the p-values. Relative risk, we will also have the relative risk numbers, which are also important, but again, we are not covering this in this webinar, right? And then they have all important qualitative variables for perio and you know, those things. So they have bleeding on probing, and that's a nominal variable, no or yes, so it's a binary variable here. They have the PCR for AA, they have three types of PCR, and then they have, which are laboratory tests of molecular biology, and then they have the periodontal probing depth. So they also categorized the periodontal probing depth, more than 4 millimeters, less than 4 millimeters, so they turned this variable into a qualitative variable as well. Okay, then they used the crosstabs, and for the comparisons they used, they used Friedman's test, right? The p-value of the Friedman test is being shown in the graph, okay? But then, of course, you guys are seeing a line graph, not a bar graph. So why they are not showing the results in a bar graph and yes, in a line graph? Because the results are being shown over time, right? So we have three different results. We have the baseline, we have after 45 days, and the same patients were followed up to 3 months, and then this evolution is being shown in a line graph, which is the correct type of graph for this situation. All right, but you still have the p-value of Friedman, and they are saying that the Friedman was significant, right? So the Friedman test was below 0.05. They are saying in a general way like that, which shows that the laser was actually influencing significantly the results of the periodontal treatment for those patients of this study, which is a sample of HIV patients. All right, so those are the main findings of this study, at least the main description of the statistical analysis. Let's see the second study of this webinar, which is an article of radiology. So the title is Diffusion Weighted MRI. So MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging for differentiation between two alterations, two diseases. One is sialadenitis, the simple inflammation of the salivary glands, and the other one is the pleomorphic adenoma, which is actually a tumor, right? So let's see what we got here. So we have the comparison. Of course, this is a comparison, and then you guys can see the table 1 showing the groups comparison, right? Please realize that here we have 3 groups. So we have, for the parotid gland, we have 3 groups. We have the normal parotid glands, we have the glands with sialadenitis, and we have the glands with pleomorphic adenoma. And we are measuring a number that comes from the MRI examination, which is the diffusion coefficient, right? This is the comparison of this study, and we can see that the p-value was absolutely significant, which is saying to us that the ADC value, so the diffusion coefficient value, could differentiate the conditions that we are seeing in those groups. Okay? For submandibular glands, though, we have only 2 groups, and that's why the test used is not ANOVA, it's the t-test. You guys can see in the captions of this table, and no significant differences were found. So actually the pleomorphic adenoma is the condition being differentiated by this number, right? This type of quantitative examination using the magnetic resonance imaging device. All right. To show that, we created this graph. So we have a bar graph here, like a normal comparison graph. We have the values of the ADC. We are talking about mean values because normality was confirmed. Okay, we use the Shapiro-Wilk test. This is being said there as well. And then you guys can see the differences for parotid gland, right? The same differences are not observed for submandibular gland. The graph is very clear about that, and the star that you guys are seeing, or the asterisk that you guys are seeing, in the parotid gland group is telling us that the difference is indeed significant according to the ANOVA test, right? Or the t-test if we are talking about two groups only. All right, and then we have we have the comparison for when we include pleomorphic adenoma in this case, and that's why the second graph is about the ANOVA test, because it's the only comparison including the three conditions, and then we already know that the p-value is significant, right? So that's the take-home message of this study. Pleomorphic adenomas can be detected by the use of ADC values from magnetic resonance imaging examinations, right? So this was what we found here. Very good. And the third and last paper of this webinar is basically a paper on laser as well. So this is a microcomputed tomographic examination and histomorphometric analysis, which is a bone morphometric analysis of human alveolar bone repair. So after the extraction, how the socket is repairing after being induced by laser phototherapy. Okay. Of course, we have here two groups as well, so I'm going just to show, so we have the table 1, which is a descriptive table. We are seeing the gender of the patients. Because this is a pilot study, you guys have actually individual data of all patients, right? So technically this is more of an individual table, although it's not showing all the variables here. Okay, but we have data of all the 10 patients of each groups. Okay, and then we have the pictures, and then we have table 2, which is only the parameters of the micro-CT. And then we have table 4, which is the most important one here, right? So table 4 is showing us the 4 variables that we have, and then the median, the mean and the standard deviation results of the two groups, the control group and the laser group, which is the one with of course with the laser phototherapy, and the p-value telling us the difference between those two groups, right? And you guys can see that for bone volume, the volume being recovered with laser is more than the bone volume being recovered without laser, and the p-value lower than 0.05 is telling us that this difference is significant. All right, the test that they used here is the student t-test, because normality was confirmed also for this sample, right? You guys can see that there are other tables, there are other variables and other types of comparisons, but the main comparison is being shown in a bar graph, right? So we have a bar graph on figure 4. The graph here is actually showing the percentage of bone, which is a variable, but we have the central tendencies of each group being represented in those bars, right? And the laser group is, of course, higher and significantly higher than the control group, which is showing that the laser phototherapy with the protocol that we used here was significant better for bone healing as compared to the normal bone healing without the laser. Okay, so this was the analysis of those 3 studies, and see you guys in the next webinar.